Hello, welcome to the Say It with Tarot podcast. I'm your host, Janet Boyer, and I'm the author of Naked Tarot, Tarot in Reverse, Back in Time Tarot, and the co-creator of the Coffee Tarot and Snowland decks that my husband Ron did the art for. You can find me online at janetboyer.com. This inaugural episode is going to be Tarot in the Time of Coronavirus, the Fool. I have the intention of going through the major arcana and perhaps the whole deck, looking at it through the lens of the coronavirus experience. As I record this, it's November of 2020. We're supposedly in a crazy surge of COVID-19, the pandemic, and with Thanksgiving and the holidays fast approaching, people are going to have to make decisions about how they navigate being around people, what their responsibilities are to themselves, their community, their families, and so on. And I thought I'd start with the Fool because, well, it is the first card of the tarot traditionally, even though its number is 0. It's not usually in the Rider-Waite version, ascribed a number. It's usually 0 or just not numbered at all. This is because the Fool is a blank slate. Now, let me back up. The reason why I am doing this series is mostly for personal reasons. When the pandemic first hit around March of 2020, it didn't really change a whole lot of my life personally because I'm naturally a hermit anyway, and I live in a big old coal house, a duplex that was converted into, a double house, and I have a lot of creature comforts here in terms of creativity, with writing or making jewelry. There's always music in the house or somebody's making something. I have tons of books. There's always something that I could do here, and cooking. I love to cook, especially with my husband. So, it didn't really affect us at first as a family because my husband was a essential worker as well, other than the fact that, a few weeks into it when they started to realize, whoa, this is, really something. And then his workplace was required to wear masks and disinfect and things like that. But as the summer wore on, I think what made it worse for me personally wasn't so much staying at home because of having that strong hermit archetype and living, in nature and surrounded by trees and, can go outside and breath fresh air, and I'm not packed in with people all around me living in rural Pennsylvania. I think what really started to weigh on me was the rhetoric that was going on social media and from the American government, and just seeing the numbers of people dying and suffering, and also this summer talking to my primary care provider who contracted coronavirus and was in intensive care. And he told the story about how he was talking to a guy that was, I think, the next room over or what have you, or he could hear him. And he was chatting. He was eating his dinner. I think he was maybe in his 30s. And the next day he was dead. And he also told me another story about this young woman. I think she was in her 20s, and she got coronavirus. And I guess because it can, it's near the sinus area and the head area, the brain and the spine, it somehow got into her spine and she became paralyzed. And it really hit home for me because I didn't know anybody personally who had coronavirus. We disinfected all our groceries that my husband would pick up from Walmart. I would order online and things like that. And so we felt pretty buffered from it. But then when he told me about this, I'm like, man, this stuff's real. And I didn't question whether it wasn't. But I mean, it makes it more personal. And then, when I saw the ugly election rhetoric and just the denial and selfishness of some people, and I didn't realize how much it was wearing on me psychically. The combination of the coronavirus plus the election rhetoric until Biden won, and then there was a sense of relief. I literally felt my throat chakra finally open. I felt like I just took a deep breath. It was almost like I've been holding my breath for 8 months or more, and I was like, whoa. And I just been really reflecting on the coronavirus experience and how the tarot can help ground us and cause us to reflect on things. Sometimes, when pandemics are going on or our daily life is disrupted in such a way to where we are limited from social contact, interacting with people, some of our lives is extremely curtailed in terms of, my heart's with those people who have lost their jobs and, can't work or have restricted work because of the pandemics. And, my heart goes out to you. I mean, my, quote, suffering has only been psychic pretty much. And it's not to dismiss what I've been going through. But, I mean, there's some people with some major real suffering. And my heart goes out to any of you that have dealt with this disease or have lost anyone to it. But it occurred to me and I've always said this as a tarot teacher and author and deck creator, that tarot is just so amazing in how it reflects the human experience. I mean, all facets, really. The material, the emotional, the mental, the physical, just everything, even the spiritual. And so I'm mostly doing this podcast for myself, to be honest, as a way to ground myself, to contemplate, what's going on, and to digest it, and to not get swept away so much in what's going on in terms of the media and the rhetoric coming out of the White House at this point, which is alarming and disturbing to many of us. So, I hope you benefit from it. Maybe you'll see certain cards in a new way that maybe will inform your own tarot readings, or hopefully will help you in terms of journaling or coming to grips with difficulty and challenges and obstacles in life, of which the pandemic is just but one, but it's one that we're all sharing at this point all over the world. It's this unifier in terms of, every country is dealing with it in some way. And so I thought I would address, each tarot card and just my thoughts about how it seems to be reflecting in the energy through the lens of the pandemic as well. Now, you may not agree with some of the things I say, and that's okay. I'm not trying to make any political statements. That's not my point. It will be my opinion and how I've dealt with it and how it's affected me emotionally and psychically. But if you disagree, and have a totally different take, that's fine. So just, take what applies to you and what makes sense to you. And if, you can't digest it, fine, toss it or leave it on the shelf for another time, or consider it, and think about it. It's really up to you, obviously. And so let's talk about the Fool card. The Fool is a really interesting card in that it is basically like a chalkboard that hasn't been written upon. It's the tabula rasa, the blank slate. Some say it's a lot like the soul when it first comes into the world, and it's going to be written upon by parents and teachers and religions and culture and school. Some would say that a lot of who we are as a person is already written in our DNA before we even come out of the womb. Some would say that our souls exist even before we incarnate, and with our guides and helpers and angels and God, whatever you want to call those on the other side, that we formulate certain curriculum, for us to learn and advance and grow our soul or experience certain things before we come down to the earth. And so we kind of script some of that. So, it's, there's some argument whether a soul is ever really truly blank, but that's what that energy is. It's basically an energy of being unwritten upon, until externals start, inscribing or coloring. For example, you look at a blank page, it invites color, it invites lines, it invites words. And once those are applied to the blank page, it changes in both form and in function. Now, I see two major aspects to the Fool, and they can be described as childlikeness versus childishness, because in many ways the Fool is like a child. Many or most children are naive, they're innocent, they're pure, they're guileless, they're gullible. until, of course, humans around them start imprinting them with their own prejudices or biases or teachings, morals, their codes, and what have you. And then, to some extent, the nurture starts shaping them along with the nature, the DNA that we come with. And so in terms of the pandemic, there's two sides to that. As I said, I think I'll start with what I consider the darker aspects or the more negative, although again, negative, positive is relative. And that would be the childishness of rebelling against wearing a mask. I just saw a tweet on Twitter, railing against the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, calling him a dictator because he wants to mandate mask wearing. And I think to myself, really? Is it really that much of a burden to wear a mask to protect yourself, or more importantly, your neighbor, while you go out? Is it really that big of a deal? Is it really such oppression? It's almost like how a child, when you have to buckle them into their car seat or what have you, and sometimes they squirm and they cry and they, I don't want to get dressed, I want to run around naked, or I don't want to be in my car seat, and I don't want to be restricted in any way. And there's a sense of childishness in that, because as parents we know that we're caretakers of young children, and we have to protect them to an extent. They can't protect themselves. They not only don't have the cognitive abilities yet, they don't have the physical ability to protect themselves. And so, when I see people, crying about wearing a mask, they seem like children to me. And I'm like, wow, because some of the energy of the fool in terms of childishness is recklessness, the feeling that I'm invincible. When you're younger, you just think you're not going to die, or nothing bad's going to happen to you. Oh, God, I was like that. I remember when Wonder Woman first came out with Linda Carter, and she was one of my heroes, her and the Bionic Woman. And I assumed I could just, not that she could fly, I don't know what the heck I was thinking, but she could jump pretty good if I recall. And I remember climbing up on my parents' dresser, and my mom was in the kitchen preparing the bottles for my brother, who was 4 years younger than me. So if he was still in the bottle, then I must have only been 5 or something. And I wanted to jump. I climbed to the top of the dresser. I'm standing upon the dresser, and the bed was their bedroom wasn't that big, and the bed was only maybe 2-3 feet. I could easily have jumped it, but midair I got nervous, and I just kind of held back, and so of course I fell on the floor and broke my arm. Compound fracture, actually, 2 of them. And I'd like to point out, a couple years later, when I was around 9, I refractured them when I was dared to do one-handed cartwheels down the steep hill in the morning with dew covered all over the grass. But anyway, my crazy childishness aside, as a kid, sometimes you just don't realize, and that's why you have to always hold on to your child and say, look both ways, but you still don't trust them. You still got, hold on to their arms because you don't want them to go into traffic or to hurt themselves. And sometimes kids are just so fascinated, kind of like the fool looking up in the sky, oblivious of that cliff he's about ready to walk off of. Oh, look at the pretty butterfly, or, what a beautiful day, and clueless that he's about ready to plunge possibly to his death. And so that sometimes, to an extent, could flip to the childlikeness, where you have joy in your heart and you feel uplifted. But I'm talking about the childishness aspects first, where a person is reckless. They're going without a mask. I have rights. You can't tell me what to do. Again, pure child. You can't tell me what to do. The petulance, the ignorance. Ignorance is bliss, but it can kill you. You can't say I didn't know, or I refuse to acknowledge something, like, let's say walking off that cliff like the fool that's portrayed in the Rider-Waite Smith, and think, you're going to be somehow protected from the consequences because there's this pesky law called gravity, and, it won't protect you from your stupidity or your ignorance or your refusal to deny reality. And, the coronavirus is a virus that infects regardless of political party, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, age, religion, or lack thereof. It has affected and is affecting us all, and they're projecting some really frightening stats for, the fall and winter. And so in terms of the fool with a pandemic, with the childishness, I see that too as, buying into propaganda instead of science, or confusing precaution and looking out for your neighbor, which I would consider like Four of Wands, with oppression, which is the devil. Now, if you have a tarot deck, I encourage you to just really think about that. Get out your Four of Wands and get out your devil. Do they look anything you like? No. One is community and celebrating, and I always see fours as some types of boundaries or protection, or perhaps even celebration within a community. And the devil, of course, is, some type of oppression or enslavement or bondage, whether through addiction to materialism, enslavement to ideals, or even cult-like ideology. And, the Four of Wands I see as, you're looking out for your neighbor because, the science has told us that you can be a carrier for the coronavirus, which is basically just a mutated form of the cold virus, but a deadly one for many people. It's looking out for your neighbor because you could be a carrier and not have any symptoms yourself. And let's face it, those of us who don't have any symptoms aren't going to go get tested anyway. And so just because you feel good and you feel healthy, it doesn't mean that you can't infect people. And, as Four of Wands, I also see as kind of looking out for your neighbor and celebrating your brothers and sisters that live around you and humanity in general, and think, I wouldn't want to infect someone, especially somebody with a compromised immune system, like a child, the elderly, somebody with a pre-existing health condition, or somebody who's getting, let's say, chemo for cancer where their immune system's suppressed, or somebody who is suffering from, a suppressed immune system, through a chronic health condition that affects your immune system. And, it's just consideration. And yet, the childishness of the fool says, I'm being oppressed, and this is, tyranny, and this is oppression, requiring me to wear a mask, when it's basically just common courtesy. Just like you wouldn't go up to someone, even before the pandemic, and sneeze in their face. Only an idiot would do that, right? But now we can just, with some people, they think that, well, we can just go to super spreader events, or we can walk around wherever we want and not have a mask and everything's cool. But they don't even know if they're a carrier, and now they're saying that droplets might be carried actually past the 6 feet, and they can exist on surfaces for, a longer time than expected. And so, ignorance, again, is not going to protect somebody from a disease. There's something called, magical thinking, which I think we'll touch upon when it comes to the magician, the next card. But, you think, just because you think, so it is, the secret, and that kind of thing. And yes, I do believe positive thinking can help us. I do believe that our biology can be affected by intention. Studies have showed this, like with the intention experiment book and things like that. But, 9 times out of 10, we are not going to turn away from like a pandemic or protect ourselves necessarily by just positive thinking. Will it help? Absolutely. Positive thinking and optimism and joy and love and anything that releases oxytocin and stuff, of course, will help our immune system and help our well-being, help us to fight things better. However, it's not a guarantee. And then we have the childlikeness. Now, this is stuff that I've had to really cling to, the positive aspects of the Fool during this pandemic, because especially for those of us who are empaths that, whether psychic or emotional empaths, where we really feel the field, and it's, it's sometimes you're like, is this me? Is this menopause? Or I just turned 50, so I was like, oh God, or am I psychically feeling this field? And, and after Biden won, and, a few days later, I realized, oh my gosh, some of this oppression that I had been fighting, I was keeping my head above water mostly, but there were some days where I was just so exhausted, so fatigued, so tired. So what's the point? Not necessarily like within my marriage and being a mom and stuff, because I got 4 beautiful fur babies and I got my family. Although our beloved 16-year-old Stuart did die this summer. So that was a really hard blow too, emotionally. It brought up a lot of negative emotions. And that was kind of the eruption too that helped bring some of this to the surface. But then I realized, oh my God, I must have been feeling this psychic field too, not just, for myself personally, but with humanity in general. And I realized too how important it is to have the childlikeness aspects of the Fool during times like this. And it can be hard, especially like I said, if you're an empath. It's almost like you have to be purposeful in your foolishness, and in terms of the optimism and joy. It's an intentional thing, as opposed to just the blank slate ignorance, la la la, life is good, and you're clueless. But almost to have an intentional optimism and hope and joy. It's almost like we have to ask ourselves every day, what am I going to write on this blank slate of the day? How am I going to determine how this day goes? And a lot of that, is determined by our choices. I mean, if we live on default, whereas let's say we have our alarm set to news radio as we get up, which I don't recommend that, or we're checking CNN or something as we get up, or even Facebook, you're almost allowing a floodgate to come into your mind, your mental space, your aura, your energy field, and it will affect your day. So it's almost like, we have to intend the divine child part of the Fool, to get through some of this stuff like the pandemic, or, seeing some of the craziness in politics and cruelty and some of the ideology going around. You think, how can my fellow humans think or believe this? And it's almost like we have to, and it's not an intentional ignorance, but it's an intentional cultivation of that childlikeness, where you say, ask yourself, what am I going to write on this day? What will bring me joy? What can I explore today? What is beautiful today? Wonder in nature and in science. I mean, science is mind-blowing. You just go to YouTube and, oh my gosh, the science channels, or even bird watching channels or nature watching channels, and you just see the variety of the birds and aquatic life and what have you. And that helps give you that wonderment and remind you that not everything in the world is crappy, or going to hell in a handbasket, which sometimes, I was getting that way. I just was getting angry and then apathetic at humanity. And it's one of the reasons why I kind of left tarot to an extent. And then this just made it worse. I'm like, what is wrong with humanity? And it's kind of hard to see that that's only a small slice. And even if you prevent yourself or limit yourself from watching the news, it's just, it's almost like you just can't escape it. I mean, I look outside my front window when I'm making coffee, and my neighbor has a huge Trump flag, a couple Trump signs, flags on his truck, and he still has them there, and this is, 2 weeks, into November or so. And he, obviously he's not acknowledging the results of the election. And, again, that's why, we have to try to intentionally, I was actually lowering the blinds to an extent where I could see the flags. Hey, you got to do what you got to do, right? I had other beautiful areas of scenery around the house that was just plain, woods and trees and what have you. But you got to, focus on those things which are good and lovely and pure and honest. You have to actually willfully look for innocence and be innocence. And sometimes, too, it can involve holding your own tongue and behavior and not becoming like the people that you may despise. That is one of the benefits of being self-actualized, or heading towards that peak of the triangle from Abraham Maslow's, triangle, to be actualized and be focused more on creativity and advancing your soul and having personal growth. But of course, you have to have those bottom needs, with a pyramid met as well, with your food, clothing, health. And some of us don't have that with the pandemic. Those of us who don't have health insurance, I don't have health insurance, for example. So, part of me is like a fool and saying, okay, universe, please try to keep me healthy. And I eat pretty healthy. I'm almost like a vegetarian. My husband's a vegan. We cook everything, from scratch. And so take vitamins and herbs, and, we eat pretty healthy and what have you. But still, that's not a guarantee either. And so, we do our best on our end, but like I just had to go to the dentist. It was the first time I had been out. Like since March, I've only been out physically 3 times the house since March. One was in April when I got some flowers, a ton of flowers to put around the house to enjoy in April at Home Depot. wearing a mask. Another time was in the summer walking around the park, and then the day I had to go to the dentist. I had some things bothering me, and it's a good thing I did go. But, that was out of pocket. I have no insurance for that. But anyway, my point is to try to, no matter where you're at, try to look for what's positive, what it induces wonder in us, what brings us joy. There's a dog on the full card, and many of us tarot enthusiasts ascribe that to instinct and warning. Like if something's warning you not to go off the cliff, don't be so clueless that you're not looking at warning signs. But I find it interesting when I look at it. I see like a pet, a rescue dog, and I saw studies that say that shelters are having record numbers of adoptions because of COVID. Many people were home, and I think that's a wonderful thing, not only for adopting rescue dogs and cats, but also because of the love and the affection and groundedness that pets provide for us, and the care, of course, we provide for them. And even just observing them, and interacting with them can really, and playing with them can bring us that sense of childlike full energy. Or, coloring in adult coloring books, or maybe buying toys from your youth, or paper dolls, or, I've been making jewelry for the last 2 years, and I hardly sell any of it on my Etsy shop, but oh well. I just love working with beads, and it's beautiful. And I once listened to Carolyn Mace on her Archetypes audio series. It's got tons of CDs. And I was re-listening to it recently, and I thought it's so interesting that when she was talking about the child archetype, she actually mentioned beading. And I was like, oh my gosh, that has to be why I'm so into it, because I have this huge magical child archetype. And really, like working with the colored beads and metals and wires and crystals and stuff, it's like bead candy. It's like being in a candy store for me. That's my version of, yummies. And that has brought me a lot of joy and groundedness. And again, there has to be an intentional aspect to this because, being an author, we have it drummed into our head about marketing and branding and being on brand and, make sure you tell people about your services and, take a million pictures of your books or whatever in different scenarios with sage and crystals and make it look all pretty and enticing and what have you. And, when you get inundated with that, where, it's about making, expanding your brand or making money, which I'm so over anyway, but there's still some of that training in the back of my mind that we have gotten as authors, from whether it's biz school people or, marketing folks or even our own publishers or what have you. And so I'm making jewelry and I'm thinking, oh, wow, I can make money with this. And no, I'm not making hardly anything. I sell things once in a while. People tell me how beautiful my stuff is, but, I don't sell much, and that's okay. A lot of people are getting into jewelry because they have to stay home, and one of the hobbies it seems that people are taking up is jewelry making, which I think is fantastic. But because they're making their own jewelry, they're not buying it for other people, even though, there's so many different styles out there. And I know for me, I make everything one of a kind. I never, ever repeat a design. If somebody ever asks me, which I've had a couple times, oh, can you make me a bracelet just like this? I always say no. I say I could change it up a little, similar colors, but I will never make the same design twice. I mean, it's just important to me to be original. It always has been. That's why I don't write tarot books that are regurgitations. I feel like if I don't have something new to offer, I'm not going to, glut the market. Same way with the decks that we make. Snowland is the only deck that's kind of like Christmas themed, but also Nordic myths and Arctic animals and what have you. It's the only deck dedicated or set in snowy, frosty, wintry mythos and landscapes. Coffee deck, again, the only deck that is dedicated to, the making of, growing, roasting, enjoying of coffee. And so for me, jewelry making and even the originality aspect of it, but also just working with my hands and seeing the pretty colors and coming up with designs, it's so grounding. I can do it for hours. And I lose time. I mean, there are times I've actually sat down and has worked like 6 hours straight on jewelry just because a color combination inspired me. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I just, make a necklace or two, then a couple, memory wire bracelets, some earrings. And so I encourage you too, with your intentions, if you want to embrace more of that joyful, positive aspects of the Fool, the childlikeness, find something you can get lost in to get into the flow, whether it's adult coloring books or learning to draw little kawaii symbols, or learning a musical instrument. YouTube is a wealth of information that's completely free. You can learn a language, learn anything really you want. And then there's something called the Great Courses. We subscribe to Great Courses Plus. And, there's that childlikeness in terms of, wow, wonderment. You go into a museum. I don't know about you guys. When I first went into a science museum, it was just like, wow. Or even a library, my local library as a kid, my mom would drop me off, and I would literally take in a duffel bag and then come out with like 8 to 10 books. And I still have a wonderment. Like, I have tons of bookshelves here in my house that my husband's built filled with books, and there's still the wonderment, the smell of the pages and what have you. So I encourage you to intentionally look for those places, not that you're mindless, but more that you're in the zone. You're totally in the present moment. Worries aren't getting to you as much, where you can just cultivate joy and pursue beauty and truth and loveliness and those things that, bring you that sense of innocence, where you reconnect to your soul and you hopefully remember that part of you before you were born or before you were sullied, maybe, by parents or society or schools or religion or what have you, those people that tried to tell you who you were or what to believe. And so, for me, that's part of the Fool energy that I have actively tried to pursue. Like what brings me out, watching cartoons. I love Boomerang, and my son and I sometimes sit there and just watch cartoons. Like, I love Scooby-Doo or Jetsons and things like that. Especially the old school cartoons, or Disney Channel, Winnie the Pooh. I love Winnie the Pooh. I totally admit to this, which is kind of funny, but it's true. I do have a strong magical child, and I'll sit there and watch, Winnie the Pooh cartoons and things like that. And I listen to it. I'll sometimes put lullabies on Amazon Music. it's just, I have a strong archetype, magical child archetype in my soul, my path. But even if you don't, you can try to look for those things to help you amidst the difficulty, And so I encourage you to just ponder the Fool card. If you have a deck or multiple decks, get out the Fool card for all the different ones. Or if you don't have any, just go online, images.google.com, and then put in Fool tarot card. And then you'll be able to see all the different Fool cards and compare them. And you could journal about them and ask yourself, what is the difference between foolishness and just taking a positive risk or having faith? What is the difference? Where is the line? Especially in terms of how we live in this pandemic. What is the difference between childlikeness and childishness? Where am I at in that? How can some aspects of the Fool energy help me? Are there aspects of the Fool energy that I'm buying into that are harmful to me or others? And so there's some, questions that we can explore just with any card, because there's such a breadth of the continuum of each card's meaning. So I hope you enjoyed this first episode of Tarot in the Time of Coronavirus, The Fool. Again, I am Janet Boyer. You can find me at janetboyer.com, and I look forward to bringing some more of my insights and experiences to you, and hopefully they'll help you as well navigate these challenging times. Have a great day.